Hello, it's John Heaton, and today I'm going to do a slightly different video. It's a little bit negative, this one. I don't often do a negative one, but over the years I've been accused of being a bit sycophantic towards the Beatles, and I know maybe I've made that criticism of others, that people are so sort of in love with the Beatles that they find it hard to criticize anything. And a couple of people recently have accused me of, for example, sort of pandering and saying favourable things about Lennon output just to get freebies from the Lennon estate, or the only reason I like Yoko is to be loyal to John. And you know, these people sort of stating their opinion as if it's a matter of fact, and it's not. There's quite a few examples over the years where I've taken issue with either a song or something that the ex-Beatles have said. The ones I've singled out are going to be sort of ones which happened to me at the time, not retrospectively. So I'm not going to tell you that, for example, retrospectively I was disappointed with Mary Had a Little Lamb. Not that I dislike that song particularly, or I'm not going to say retrospectively I didn't like Two Virgins, because I wasn't around at the time. But I will tell you, I've been a fan since 1978. So I can give you 9 examples of where I was pretty pissed off, or should we say bewildered, by things in the Beatle world. So I'll start off by the number one. I haven't got anything to show you here. It's in 1979, well, John, as we all know, took a 5-year sabbatical. And when I first got into the Beatles, I found out that Paul was more or less the only active Beatle. Although Ringo had just released Bad Boy and George would release his self-titled the following year, Wings were far more active than the other 3. And John was not active at all, and this didn't really piss me off. It's up to him, it's his personal life. But as a 14, 15-year-old, I was desperate for him to return, and kept on listening to Walls and Bridges as the last album of his own material, thinking, is this the last word from John, or are we going to hear more? And in 1979, John and Yoko took out a full-page advert in the New York papers, the London and the Tokyo papers. And it was a full-page explanation of why they were not making music. And it was just, I found it at the time as a 15-year-old quite pretentious. And I thought this added fuel to the fire of, you know, the rumour that John and Yoko were sort of living the Howard Hughes life and gone a bit crazy. And this did nothing to negate that opinion. It was full of things like our silence is one of I think they said our silence is one of love, not of indifference, or something to that effect. And then at the end they said, P.S. we noticed that 3 angels were looking over our shoulder when we wrote this. I thought, that's... So I was a bit, you know, come on, stop faffing around and get back in the studio, John, kind of thing. And I was quite impatient, and of course you can imagine how delighted I was when they finally announced that they were going to make a comeback. In 1979, Christmas at school, Paul released this single. And whilst I don't mind it now, and I've grown to quite like it, one has to admit it's quite twee. And I think if it had been released by anyone else, such as Cliff Richard or Val Doonican, I would have probably hated it. At the time, it was tough to defend, and you know, 1979 Christmas, you know, around the time when Talking Heads and Blondie and The Clash were at their peak, and here was Paul coming up with this, one has to say, twee Christmas song. And as I say, it's grown on me over the years. I don't find it offensive anymore, but it's not a heavyweight effort, let's put it that way. And so I was pretty embarrassed at the time. In 1980, we received word that George had going to release a kind of semi-autobiography, including sort of notes and sort of printed lyrics of his songs, you know, handwritten lyrics and explanations behind each song, and this would have been a treasure trove for a Beatles fan. But then they said it cost £148, and that was £148 in 1980, which is probably somewhere around about £1,000 today, I think. And it was just just way out of reach for us fans, and it just pissed me off. And so what is George doing? And I think I wasn't the only one who's pissed off. I remember the Beatle community was sort of a bit flabbergasted by this behaviour, and then the book did finally come out in 1982 for £10, and it's not as deluxe as the £148 version, which was actually signed by George Harrison, so it actually would have been quite a good investment. But there's no way I could lay my hands on 150 quid at the time, and so I did wait. In 1982 we did get that 10 quid version, but for a couple of years we were pissed off that we couldn't get it. And then later on Derek Taylor did exactly the same thing and wrote what one understands is a great autobiography called 50 Years Adrift in an Open Neck Shirt, and did the same thing and charged 150 quid or 200 quid through Genesis Publications. And so none of the fans, I don't even know anyone who has that book, or maybe there's a few out there, but it's a shame, because that would have been a classic read, I think, and they just once again deprived the fans. But anyway, back to 1980, when this album was announced, we were told it was going to be 7 songs of John and 7 songs of Yoko, and I was immensely pissed off by this. I was thinking, after 5 years, we really do deserve, if it has to be John and Yoko, then an album each, or a double album. But 7 songs, I felt shortchanged and pissed off. And when the album came out, and when the single came out, and that was the front cover, I didn't much like the cover. I thought it was a bit overly sentimental, and I didn't think it would help sell the record particularly. I think in hindsight I was being a bit stupid, and over the years I've come to see Double Fantasy as a very mature record on a relationship, and both sides sort of working out how to make the best of a relationship and going through the ups and downs. And it's not all rosy as sometimes is portrayed. They do portray the negative side on this album, but at the time I was pissed off that it was only half John, and I was pissed off. I was a little bit sort of miffed by the cover. Didn't think it was great. The back cover I preferred tremendously. So that was Double Fantasy. Then we've got 1981. When this album came out, I quite liked the album, but I absolutely loathed Ringo's revisitation of Back Off Boogaloo, which I didn't think was a particularly good single to begin with in 1972, although it did get to number 2 in the charts. It's never been a favourite of mine, but he completely ruins it with a pointless cover, together with Harry Nilsson singing sort of backing vocals and sort of mentioning other Beatles tunes. And Ringo may have thought he was being clever, but it was just really annoying. So that was not good from Ringo. 1984, I'm afraid, this film, when it came out, and we'd been sort of building up to it for a couple of years. The Beatles Monthly was giving us updates, and we knew who was in the film in terms of actors. John Bennett was in it, Ralph Richardson. And then we saw the film, and I couldn't really sort of defend it. I mean, there were some good bits in it, but relatively few. I would say out of 100%, I would say about 20% of it is watchable, and the rest of it is pretty dire. And the best bits are inevitably the music. But and I didn't like the album much either, and I still don't like it to this day. I think it was pointless to recover Beatles material, and Silly Love Songs is also reprised here, and Paul, when he goes back to his old songs here, doesn't improve on the originals in any of the cases, although Long and Winding Road is quite a nice version. Some people hate it. So I thought that was pointless. There's one solid gold song on this album, which is No More Lonely Nights, Andrew Brooks' favourite McCartney song of all time. And then the new songs, Not Such a Bad Boy and No Values, I always thought were Back to the Egg rejects. I didn't like them much at all. I mean, they're pretty good compared to some of the stuff Paul's come up with more recently, but at the time they were very disappointing, sort of lackluster rockers with pretty bad lyrics. So that was Paul. I'm afraid the next one is also from Paul. It's the following year, Spies Like Us. I haven't never seen the movie, and I don't intend to. It's probably an awful movie, and it's an awful song. I don't know. It's just completely uninspired. I mean, it's built around this riff, And the video's stupid with the Prince Charles mask, and they're marching across Abbey Road, and it's just an embarrassment for all concerned. Paul's sort of reputation around this time was around about as low as it was going to get. So that was Paul, Spies Like Us. And then in 1985, George Harrison's Handmade Films came out with a film called Porky's Revenge, and it had a song from George Harrison covering a Dylan song called I Don't Want to Do It. And I had the soundtrack of that album, but I was so disgusted by sort of the quality of that George song, I actually sold it quite recently. And for some reason, Olivia put that song on the Let It Roll Greatest Hits, and it has no place there, or no place on any George album, or even should never have been released. It's a terrible song from Dylan, and I don't often say that about a Dylan song, and it's a dreadful version from George. I don't think anyone could have rescued it. It's just a terrible song, so you can check it out and make up your own minds. And then the following year, 86, Shanghai Surprise came out, and George Harrison was kind of giving press conferences with Madonna, and it was all a bit sort of embarrassing, and the film was a flop. Sean Penn was in it, and in retrospect, I could have gone to see it because there were a couple of George Harrison songs in it, 3 songs in the movie, I think. Someplace Else turned up on Cloud 9, which is quite good, but Hottest Going in Town is quite weak. And Shanghai Surprise is also a weak number. So this was not a good time for George, but he was about to make a comeback. And the following year, he did make a comeback. And I bought the Cloud 9 album, and I loved about half of it, or 2/3 of it. But the single, I didn't like. I remember getting home, putting it on the turntable, hearing that big drum entry from Jim Keltner. And then George comes in with the song. I'd never liked the song. I'm probably wrong in terms of commercial success, because it was a huge #1 single in America and #2 in the UK. And to this day, you get people interviewed, the younger generation, and they're asked what their favourite Beatles song. They say "Got My Mind Set on You." So some people don't even know it's a solo song, but I think George has done a lot better. For example, his single from the self-titled album, "Blow Away," should have been a huge hit and wasn't. But yet this one got to #2 in England. So I can't fathom it. But anyway, that was 9 examples of when I've been disappointed or felt let down a bit, or a bit sort of cheesed off by things the Beatles have said or done. On the whole, I love all 4 of them, of course, but I just wanted to do this video to show you I'm not a one-way street, and I'm not just giving my love kind of unreservedly. I will criticise when I feel it's warranted. So that was it. Thanks for watching. See you next time.